Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video from Oman Talks NRL SuperCoach. In today's video, we're going to be going through our second position breakdown analysis, going through the front row forward, a pretty low upside position, which makes sometimes it being very difficult to decide how much money you want to spend there, who are the picks to go for. So we'll get into all of the popular picks and maybe some ones who could offer some potential value as well. Hopefully you enjoy the video. If you do, please give it a thumbs up. Please consider subscribing as well if you are new to the channel. We're on the road to 5,000 subscribers on YouTube, which is just crazy to say out loud. A couple of other plugs as well. Do follow me on Twitter, Instagram. I've also now set up my own Patreon as well, where you can see some additional content and my team throughout the season. So do sign up over there as well. The last video I posted was around some updated spreadsheets that I've now made for 2025. So get amongst those as well. You can find them in Patreon. Otherwise, you can also access them from my website, which is in the description below. Always on the lookout for potential partners and sponsors as well. So if you're interested, do get in touch via my email as well. But enough of the plugs, let's get straight into the video. So firstly, taking a look at how the front row forward has fared in the last 3 seasons in terms of top 20 averaging players. So there's generally been 1 to 2 featuring in the top 20 for each of the last 3 seasons. I don't believe there was any in 2021, but that was also a year when you had all of the backs going absolutely insane point scoring wise. Adam Blake has been one of the top dogs. He was it last year with an average of 72. He made his way in there in the top 20 in 2023 as well with an average of 73. You did have though Tino Fasumala topping that out in that 2023 season, average of 78. Of course, he was away for pretty much all of 2024. And in 2022, we didn't quite have a true front row forward player in Isaiah Papali'i with a 79 average in that year. So I guess what this is showing you is that even when they do make that top 20, at least in the last 2 seasons, they're kind of on the lower end of things. You're not going to find a front row who's going to be topping out at like kind of that 85, 90 plus average, which is what you get from your halfbacks and your fullbacks. So I think it's a low upside position and you've got a few guns who can really put those big scores out. You've got a line of thinking, do you just start with them and never worry about them, you set and forget them? Or instead, are you thinking, well, let me chase some value at the start and then maybe build my way up to some of these guns? We'll discuss that in this video. Just having a look at the same graphic, but maybe in a more of a cleaner version. So what you can see here is the number of players in the top 20 in front row. This is going back a few extra seasons, so 2021 and 2020. Not much has really changed with front row. You generally get between 1 to 2. So I think it's been a pretty stable position Supercoach wise. So I think we can probably follow some of the same principles that we have had in previous seasons. Last year, I had a tactic of starting with some kind of mid-range front row forward players who are in the 400k mark and hoping that I'd eventually build up enough cash to then upgrade to a gun later in the season. Luckily, last year we had a really good option in Terrell May to start off with at that price category. Probably don't have as good of an option in that price range this season. So it's one where I'm thinking, in general with front row, I think if I can limit the number of trades that I can make there because of its low upside, I think I'm not going to try to make too many trades. Therefore, because we're lacking maybe some in the 400s K price range, I think I might try to go up a little bit to players in the 500, pushing maybe 600, just because I do think there is low value in trading a lot in that position. And if you can't see the value, you do often get stuck with players who kind of 35, 40, but they're not really making enough money. And then you find that you do need to start spending trades elsewhere to make money to then upgrade that position. So I do think ideally you want some value, but probably spending enough to get some solid points that you just really don't need to worry about fussing around in the front row. That's going to be my strategy, I think, going into 2025. So we mentioned him already in the video, but Adam Blake, he is the top dog of front row in the last 2 seasons, you could say. And he's now moved to the Cronulla Sharks. So a team that is very reliant on their middle forwards. We saw Tom Hazelton score like 7 tries last year. And Blake is renowned for his try scoring prowess of the last few seasons as well. So I guess the question is, look, he's 706k. Do you start with him? My first thoughts immediately were no, just to be very plain and simple, mainly because of the price tag. But if you are someone who is really happy to spend that money up front in front row and not really want to bother with the trades, then Blake has to be the guy that you're considering, I think. Moving to a Cronulla Sharks team, yes, the minutes might potentially go down because there's a strong forward rotation there at that team. But he is someone who's capable of playing big minutes. He can get, we know he can get the tries as well. And I think you just know that you probably will be able to sleep comfortably at night knowing you've got him in your front row and you won't have to worry about it. terms of numbers in the last 2 seasons, so what I've got on screen is kind of his breakdown of average for beginning of the season, rounds 1 to 10, midway through the season, and then the end to the season, just to see if there's any patterns that we could see. One pattern that does seem to be consistent is that at the end of the season is when he almost is at his best. Last 2 seasons, his highest average periods were at the end of the year. So again, that might lean into your thinking of, I might wait until later in the season when I've got enough other good squad depth and money, then that's when I'll go and upgrade to the top dog in Fonua-Blake. He had a really good start to last year though, average of 77, which was better than his entire season average of 72. In 2023, he started off with an average of 69. So a little bit down in that entire season's average, but still a really, really good average. So I think the numbers do tell me that, you're probably going to pay almost what you're going to get. You might lose a little bit of value at the start, but look, at least in the first 12 weeks, he doesn't have a bye. He's generally, at least in the last 1 to 2 years, he hasn't been that injury riddled. He's had some injuries earlier in the season, early in his career, I should say. But last 2 seasons, he's been pretty fit. We know he can play big minutes, so he's got that motor in him as well. The only question I do have though is that the reliance on him to play those big minutes that he had played at times for the Warriors is probably going to be less so at the Sharks because they do have other good front row options and other good middles in that team. Draw, I don't really necessarily pay that much attention when it comes to a front row player. I guess the main thing to note there is that he doesn't have a bye in the first 12 weeks. I think you're probably going to get, if you're getting somewhere between 69 to 77 average in the opening 10 rounds, you'd be pretty happy with that. I think paying 706k. It's more a question of what that's going to sacrifice though, I guess elsewhere in your team. So he's definitely the best front row forward you can probably go for, but I think because of that price tag over 700, I'd almost rather spend that money and use that to say get Nico Hines instead. I know it's a completely different position, but he's only 30k more in halfback, but Hines is someone who can average 75. That's what he did last year. So that beat Fonua-Blake's average from last year. But Hines has just got that ceiling. We know he can go big. And I think if you're looking at spending that 700k, look, Fonua-Blake can go big, but what's the ability for him to do that on a more consistent basis compared to Nico Hines? I think I know where I'd probably be putting a bet on that one. So Fonua-Blake, probably not for me at the beginning of the season, but I can't, if you show me a team with him, I'll probably say, yeah, look, what I understand. You probably just think set and forget, don't need to worry about him. But let's get onto some other gun options now in comparison to Fonua-Blake. So the ones that I wanted to take a look at here, Fonua-Blake, Payne Haas, Mitch Barnett, Joe Tarpany, Terrell May, getting into this range of players now. And I've put in Tino Fa'asuamaleaui. I know he obviously missed out 2024, but he is a former SuperCoach gun. So I wanted to include him just as a comp for these other guys here. So we've spoken a lot about Fonua-Blake already, just to maybe round it out on him. At the time of recording, 12% owned, which isn't super high. So you'd be getting a pretty good gun option and not too high ownership. 1.03 basing power PPM. So generally what you'd find is that for every minute he plays, he's going to get you at least a point. So last year he had a 60 minutes average and then for an average of 72. What you'll notice in the stats below me though is in the yellow, that's the scoring category, which is typically the lowest for front rows. He had an average of 6 and no one else apart from no one else actually from last year had as much as him, at least in this gun category. So we know that those tries that he can be scoring is really what gets his average from that 60-65 getting into that 70 category. I don't doubt at all his ability to back that up in terms of try scoring at the Sharks because we saw Tom Hazelton score 7 tries for them last year. 30% of his games last year, he also scored over 80. So he's got that ability to, 1 in every 3 games punch over 80. You'd be pretty happy with that. But and the reasons I've stated in the previous slide, I'm personally probably not going to be looking at Fonua-Blake to start off with. If there's a need for him to not play as many minutes, maybe 55, then you could maybe see a potential slight reduction in his average as well. So I think when you're looking for value and maybe high ceiling at the start of the season being your 2 main things, he might not offer either of them. Therefore, that's probably why I'm also not going to be starting with him. Next up would be Payne Haas, who's 669k, average of 59 minutes last year for a score of 68 average. 4 games over 80 last year, so that was 29% of his games. Base power PPM better than Fonua-Blake, 1.11. And we know Payne Haas, similar to Fonua-Blake, is a guy who has a big motor and he can play big minutes. He's got similar ownership as well to Fonua-Blake. I think Haas is someone who could maybe offer more value than Fonua-Blake at the start of the year. Not last year, but if you think back to the end of 2023, he had a bit of a slump in his scoring because he was playing through some injuries. And even last year, he had periods where he was missing games and whatnot, he was also going through some injury problems. I feel like we haven't seen the most prime, fully fit Payne Haas that we have seen in kind of some of his earlier rookie years. I think if you see that, you might see that 2023 Haas who averaged 74, I think it was 73 or 74, but he started the season like a house on fire. And then even looking back to 2021, 2020, where his average was 68 and 75. So I think Haas, if he's injury free, I've read some news though that he had a clean out surgery, I think in the off season, but he should be fine for round one. That probably gives me enough pause and enough doubt where he might not be coming into the year 100% kind of fully fit and firing. So again, Payne Haas for the price, I'm probably not going to be starting with. I think that injury news or having that clean out surgery in the preseason is probably going to scare me off just that little bit, but he's definitely someone I'm going to be having a keen eye on as well for later parts of the season. Mitch Barnett is a bit of an interesting option. So 661k, averaged pretty decent minutes of 65, but a lot of that was due to him playing a bit of a hybrid role at times where he was playing in the middle, but also playing a lot of games solely on the edge. So his minutes are slightly inflated by having those games on the edge, and a 68 average last year. What I will say with Mitch Barnett though, I think the stats, while they look really good on paper here, like if you look down below me, a 53 base average and 10 points in evasive, that's about 63 points in base power, which is very, very good. His average playing through the middle at number 10 was 65 last year, and it went up to 75 when he was playing at number 12. I think with the news that Tohu Harris is retiring though, I think there's more back rowers coming through at the Warriors than there are middles. I have a feeling that Mitch Barnett, when he's going to be lining up in round one, will probably be playing as a middle. And so I think that 68 average, I think you're probably not looking at value really. I think if you expect him to be playing in the middle and with an average of 65, just looking at his number of games that he scored over 80. So he had 7 games scoring over 80. 3 of those scores being over 80, they did happen at number 12, but that only happened in 6 games. So basically 50% of the time playing on the edge is where he scored over 80. In comparison, he had only 24% of the games through the middle scoring over 80. So I think if you're hoping to punch that kind of 80 barrier, playing through the middle, you're probably not going to get that as likely with Barnett versus him playing on the edge. Maybe there's some potential that he goal kicks. I have a feeling though that it's probably going to be Luke Metcalf who goal kicks for the Warriors now that Sean Johnson has retired. If he goal kicks, then obviously that's different because his scoring numbers will go up then at that point. But I think for now, assuming he plays through the middle, probably not for me. If he gets named on the edge starting off, and that's where he does have an 80-minute role, then I think we definitely need to reconsider because he really showed good ceiling there last year. But again, for me, round one, probably not going to be where I'm going. Joe Tarpany at 4% owned is probably the lowest owned of these kind of gun front row forward options. And that's probably because people look at him as the, I guess, boring pick. Like he's been one of the kind of SuperCoach gun front rows of the last few years. You just kind of know what you're going to get from him. 655k, average of 67 last year in 54 minutes. I don't really see those minutes being any different. I mean, he's been named the captain for the Raiders, so look, maybe there's a bit of an uptick in his own performances, but that 1.16 base and power PPM, he is generally someone who has a very good PPM, but 6 games over 80, so that's 1 in 4 games. It, like, all these numbers sound about right with Joe Tarpany. Unless I see anything completely different in the preseason, I probably won't be starting with him just because I think, again, doesn't meet the criteria of offering either value or maybe that upside, where he's not scoring over 80 on a regular enough basis, I guess, for a front row. But you can't knock the pick. Like, he doesn't have a buy until round 15, which is very, very helpful. You know, you can set and forget him. But he's probably someone who I'd be looking more during the Origin period, just when you know that because he's not playing for Origin, you know that you've got that player available to you in comparison to someone like a Payne Haas. But, you know, Fanil Blake also meets this criteria as well. So again, that might be another window as to when you target these guys. So a guy who is very heavily owned, and for good reason, I would say. In the next slide, I'll show you why. 49% owned, Terrell May. Sub 600k, so he's 597k. He was about 430k at the start of last year and very, very popular. And he just turned out to be an amazing option. 45-minute average at the Roosters last year for 61 points. He had 5 games scoring over 80, but that was only 21% of games. But the best base power PPM of any of these options here, 1.18. He's just someone who's a PPM monster. Once he gets on the field, he just has an absolute motor. He likes to offload. He's got a tackle bust in him. And he does have a knack for scoring tries and getting attacking stats as well. So while on a total aggregate, if you look at his stats compared to those others, everything is lower. But that's also on an average that's 10 minutes at least less than all of these other guys. If you put his minutes up to 55, 60, give him the same base power PPM, we're looking at a guy who's probably going to be averaging mid 60s, upwards of 66, 67. Chuck in a couple of attacking stats there. We're probably looking at someone who's going to be pushing that 70 average and really pushing someone like a Fanua-Blake as the top front row forward option. Those are all the reasons why Terrell May is 49% owned. He's now moved to the West Tigers. We think there's going to be much more certainty in his minutes in the go forward. Stefano, who's now left the club, he averaged 50 minutes. If you just assume that Terrell May is going to swap in and play 50 minutes, I've got some very enticing stats about Terrell May in his 50-minute games, which we'll get onto in the next slide. But look, I own Terrell May, and there's a very, very strong likelihood that he'll just be staying there for me all preseason, and I think he'll be there for me in round one. Finally, Tino Fasumala-Awi, 37% owned. The reason I've got all of his stats in italics is because what I've pulled is his 2023 numbers. Now, I know he's coming off an ACL, so I don't expect him to be immediately going back to those 2023 numbers. It's just not realistic. But I need to probably do a bit more brushing up on Tino and how he's faring in the preseason. But I don't know what it is. Like, maybe this is not scientifically backed at all. This is more just my own gut feel. I follow NRL Physio and I love his stuff, and he regularly mentions that Pat Carrigan had the best kind of bounce back of a middle forward, or someone playing in the middle, or on the forwards in general, from an ACL injury. Tino just feels like someone who can do the same thing. He just feels like that kind of player he's just an absolute gun. Like, he's captain of the Gold Coast Titans, like he's their inspirational leader. I know they've recruited Regan Campbell-Gillard, so they have a few more middle forward options there in the likes of Tino, RCG, you've got Jamin Jolliffe still there, Mo Fotuaika, etc. But Tino is the top dog. It might be a bit of a slow improvement that you might see from round one. Granted, he misses round one with the bye, but like at 531k, you're looking at a guy who's severely discounted on the potential that we know he has. Like 78 average in front row in 2023 was just mad. He's dual as well, so you can put him at second row forward or at front row, which is very, very handy. Just looking at those 2023 numbers, 9 games where he scored over 80, that was 47% of the games he played in 2023. Like, even if I just take that 78 average and if I discount it by 15, let's say I give him 63 average, that's still value at his price of 531k. He might not come out of the gates super hot, but I just feel like he's someone who I pick him round one and I just don't need to worry about him. As long as I've got cover for him in round one, set and forget him and Terrell May, it just feels like a very safe combination for me. And I feel like the two guys who I've got a bit more faith in than, say, trying to save a bit more money, going for someone who's kind of in the low, maybe in the kind of 400s to high 300s. That's something I've tried in previous seasons. I just don't think it's quite worked out for me. And I think Tino and May just seem like such strong options. That's why their ownership is so high as well. Just digging into some of these gun players in a little bit more detail, and specifically taking a look at their over 50-minute games. Look, this is another reason why I'm so hot on a Terrell May. So he had 11 games where he played over 50 minutes last year for the Roosters, and he averaged 80 in that period of time. And I've got his stats below me in those games. So 4 games over 80 points in 11. He had a base average of 55, evasive numbers of 16. He scored a few tries as well. But I feel like just ignore the tries almost, ignore that scoring stat, because that's something you just can't quite predict with front rowers. I think you just got to look at the kind of base power numbers. And one thing you notice from the previous graph to this one is that his base and his evasive numbers all of a sudden now start really matching up with a Fanua-Blake and a Payne Haas. Like, the base numbers are very consistent with all of the gun players now. But Terrell May is more than 100k cheaper than Fanua-Blake. I think he's 70, 80k cheaper than Payne Haas. You start getting I think you're starting to know where I'm coming from. Terrell May, I think, is going to be a lock in my round one team. Just the stats just are ridiculous of him playing these big minute games. And as I said, Stefano averaged 50 minutes last year for the Tigers. If you just swap in Terrell May for that, and I think Terrell May should be getting 50 minutes now that he's playing for the Tigers, he's just someone who I think at least comfortably I expect a 65 minimum average, which is already value. But as you can see here, he's got that ability to hit over 80 points on a regular basis. I think he's an obvious pick for me. These numbers do also reaffirm, I think, for Fanua-Blake as well. You know, if he does consistently get over 50 minutes, his average went up to 77 last year for the Warriors. PPM went up a little bit. That does probably also lean into that. The more minutes you play in general, the higher likelihood of just getting attacking stats. That's just going to be a natural thing that occurs. So I think his actual base power PPM, though, didn't really differ that much in the over 50-minute games versus his other games. That's because he's also got quite a big motor. Tarpany, Barnett, their numbers just kind of go up in correlation to, I guess, the extra minutes that they're playing. So there wasn't a whole heap to read from them. And same with Payne Haas. Like, I think Fanua Blake, Haas, and Terrell May, they're all kind of the same, where they're just such big motor players that really, if they play big minutes, it doesn't really seem to affect their PPM or their output. Really, I just wanted to put this graph together just to see what it would look like for Terrell May. And yeah, it was a big confirmation bias for myself. I think he's going to be a very popular pick for round 1 teams for front row. All right, now taking a look at the next category of players here. These are the Guns Lite, the players who averaged between 50 to 60 last year in the front row. I'll be very honest, I'm not really looking at a lot of these guys. I've excluded Tino from this particular list just because I wanted to cover him in the Guns category. With Terrell May and Tino both being in the 500k range, look, as I've said, they're both kind of currently nailed into my round 1 team. So I've not really considered too much these guys, but I know others are going to be looking at different structures. So I thought it'd be worth still going through these options. Max King at 565k. I think with him, like, we know that he's just a very reliable option. Generally was pretty solid and consistent for minutes last year for the Dogs. A 52-minute average for 58 points. He doesn't really offer that much upside in terms of offloading too much or scoring that many tries. So I kind of feel like what you're seeing there is what you're going to get output-wise. So it doesn't really offer too much value. I guess if you see more injuries happening, though, in the middle forwards at the Dogs and he needs to play big minutes, you do tend to see the best out of Max King then. Like, just taking a quick look here at some of the games where he played over 52 minutes, and this is all courtesy of NRL SuperCoach Stats.com, which honestly, without that website, there's no way I would have been able to do any of my content ever since I've had this channel. So definitely go and support them with a donation as well. They do unbelievable stuff. But Max King, 59 minutes last year, he scored 70 points with 62 in base. 63-minute game, he scored 64 points with 60 in base. And then we're looking at a few more games where he played 60 minutes, 82 points, 74 in base stats. 68 minutes, 96 points with 89 points in base. So there's 4 games that I can see from 2024 where when he played closer to 59, 60 plus, that's when he was getting those big scores and really rivaling with those other gun front rowers. Because he's another one of those guys who generally, PPM wise, he doesn't tend to drop off that much. He's generally got a pretty decent motor. So I think round 1, probably not for me, but if you do see some kind of minutes increase occurring because there are other injuries happening with Bulldogs middle forwards, Max King is definitely an option because some of those stats that I rattle off there are very impressive, and at 565k he could actually offer good value. Next up, we've got Jack de Belin. Look, he doesn't really seem to be someone who is really catching the opinion or the eye of many super coaches, only 2% ownership. I think a lot of this is just that he's very steady Eddie, 551k, 54 minutes, average last year for 56 points. I feel like that's kind of what you're going to expect out of Jack de Belin. So he's kind of a no frills, no fuss option, but probably doesn't really offer that much value nor upside. Like, even if you just take a quick look at his previous seasons, again, NRL SuperCoach Stats, looking at 57 in 2023, 54 2022, and 55 in 2021. He's going to get you between 54 to 57 points average. It'd be taking a lot, I think, drastically to get him into a 60, 65 average, at which point you're like, yes, maybe you consider him. But for round 1, when you don't really see much changing, they've got Emre Gula coming into the Dragons now as well. Francis Molo, there's some discussions about what's happening with him and his contract. Assuming Molo is out, Gula's in. Again, you don't really see the minutes changing too much for JDB. So probably not for me, someone I'll be considering round 1. Now, James Fisher-Harris, of course, moving from the Penrith Panthers to the New Zealand Warriors, 549k, 56 average last year in 47 minutes. So he was one of these guys who was playing on the lower end minutes wise, and I think that was a very deliberate tactic by Ivan Cleary with him and Moses Leota. He wanted to really keep them fresh for the beginning and the end of games just to offer that massive impact, and he relied on the guys like Liam Henry and Lindsay Smith to kind of play big minutes during the middle parts of games. But that's all going to probably change a little bit, I guess, now that he's at the Warriors, and his role might be very different. Hard to comment on what that's going to look like now that we don't really have any kind of trials, minutes or form to watch on. We know that Tohu Harris is now retired, so there's going to be a bit more workload required in the middle. That might go in James Fisher-Harris's favour. I know there's a lot of good chat about him just in terms of what he's brought to that club. There's some interviews coming out from that team as well. So he does seem like he's having a big positive impact on the Warriors. We just need to see what that's going to do from a Supercoach point of view. I do see some potential value being there though with Fisher-Harris. So there were a couple of games last season that he was on the lower side minutes wise. So there was one game in round I want to say it's round 21 where he only played 3 minutes. And in round 2 versus Parramatta, he only played 25 minutes. I'm not 100% sure what that reason was for playing the lower minutes against Parramatta. But if you take out those 2 particular games, his average actually increased up to 61. So we're looking at a 5 points average increase in just maybe say call it non-injury affected or / low minute games where maybe they were a bit outside the norm. What's interesting though is that in the games he played over 50 minutes last year for the Panthers, his average actually stepped up quite considerably and it went from 56 up to 67.6. So we're looking here at about 11 points of value, and interestingly as well, his PPM was 1.14, even better than the base power PPM we're looking at here of 1.08. So someone who doesn't seem to really drop off that much output wise if his minutes do increase. I will note that average of 67.6 did only come from about 5 or 6 games from 2024, so it's on the smaller sample side of things. But I think it's probably worth at least calling out, because I think while he's not in my starting team, if you maybe are a little bit hesitant with someone like say a Tino, you think he's going to maybe start a little bit slow. If you see that Fisher Harris in the trials is getting around 50 plus minutes, he's at the age and he's got the physical ability to play that. I think you could actually see someone who does offer value, because he might have a different role to what he had at Penrith. So quoting some of those numbers, we're looking at a 67.6 average, playing over 50 minutes, that's 11 points of value. Even taking out some non-injury affected games, we're looking at a 61 average, so there's already another 5 points there too. He's definitely someone who I'm keeping as a potential. That's why you might see his ownership at 7%. It's a little bit higher than the other 2 guys we just mentioned. So Fisher Harris could definitely be an interesting prospect coming into 2025. Just want to see what the minutes look like in the trials, but definitely someone worth considering. Josh Curran, I kind of put him in the same boat as I do with Jack DeBellin. Like, he was great last year for me. I started with him in round 1. He ended up getting dual second row forward front row, averaged 52 minutes for an average of 56 points. Now last year though, he was discounted. He was coming in around the low 400s. Now that he's 547k, I think he's been priced correct to where his outputs are probably likely going to continue to be in 2025. So in saying that, I just don't think there's going to be much value. So Curran, while he was really good for us last year, there is an early buy if you want to throw that into your narrative in round 6. But I think he's just probably not going to be offering that much value. Maybe again, similar with Max King, if you do see some injuries occur in that Bulldogs pack and he has to play bigger minutes in the middle, then he might be someone actually worth considering. For example, I'm looking at 4 games in 2024 where he played over 60 minutes for the Dogs. We're looking at scores of 52, 60, 59 and 75. So again, he's kind of getting in towards that mid 50s to potentially higher 50s I should say. So look, even in that's not really offering that much value on that 56 average. So for me, probably not going to be starting with Curran. I think he's not really offering that much value nor ceiling going into this season. Now, Stefano Otokumanu, I think there's a lot of interest in him, 12% ownership. That's the same amount as Fanua Blake. A lot of that is now that he's moved to the Melbourne Storm. So he's now moving out of the Tigers, obviously underperforming team, to the grand finalists from 2024 and one of the best teams we've seen in the last, God knows what, 20, 25 years. Now, I do have my concerns with Stefano just from a SuperCoach point of view, not necessarily how he's going to benefit as a player at the Melbourne Storm. But if I look at some of his numbers here, so he averaged 50 minutes last year, which is pretty healthy for a 54 average. He averaged 41 base in that. So if you look at just below me, how that compares to a lot of these other guys that we're looking at, it is on the lower end. I don't think he's going to be someone that's going to offer you as much stability in terms of base and floor points. Where you need him to excel is on the evasive side of things. So that did go in his favor last year. So he had an average of 13 points from evasive numbers last year. That is considerably better than all of these other options that I'm looking at here. So that does show that his style of play, the ability to tackle bust and things like that, can get him those extra SuperCoach points and potentially offloading. Melbourne middle forwards, though, traditionally SuperCoach wise, they just don't really do that much. Like Christian Welch from a couple of years back was kind of someone who was a 45, 50, maybe mid 50s averaging player. I really feel like Stefano, the minutes might be the same. I can't really see that average changing too much. At least that's my opinion right now. If something looks different come the start of the season, maybe in the early rounds, then 100% I'll eat my words and I'll jump on him. But just for the time being, with those stats, I don't see Storm middle forwards having that big of a role SuperCoach wise. It's very different to, I think, maybe if I have to think of a team, say like the Cronulla Sharks, where like in the last few years, the Sharks have had a lot of forwards and they rotate minutes. but a lot of their attack goes through middle forward scoring tries. So you can see someone like a Fanil Blake benefiting. With Melbourne, I don't see that happening that much. Generally, their method of attack is to get it to their wings, get it to their gun, get it to their spine basically. Get it from Grant to Hughes, who's already on the edge. So it's already going past the middle forward. Look, occasionally Grant does send over his middle forwards for tries. But yeah, Stefano, all in all, like there is a round 2 buy thrown in there, but I won't read that much into it. It's more just what he could potentially offer as value. I'm not sure if I quite see it at this point in time. Very similar narrative, I think, with Lindsay Smith and Corey Jensen. Now, Corey Jensen, I'll quickly touch on him first. The only reason I put him on the list is that he was one of the guys in front who actually probably ended this season the best. He actually ended the season at over 600k, if you would believe it. That was because we saw his minutes increase towards the end of last year. Like looking at the last 4 games, he played 60, 68, 61, and 59 minutes for scores of 97, 79, 62, and 50. So really, really good end to the season. That saw his price end at 614k. And he had a starting season price at 413k. So he was someone who maybe last year that 414k you could maybe take a punt on. The difficulty with him this year is that there's a lot of talk about Pat Carrigan potentially being moved into the middle forward rotation at this, him and Payne Haas. That probably sees Corey Jensen go to the bench. Minutes pretty decent at 52 for a 53 average. Again, I don't see much changing there, so probably not going to be for me personally, but he probably does have some of the better base stats out of any of these guys here. Lindsay Smith is interesting for the Penrith Panthers. Now that you've got Fisher Harris leaving that team, you could see him stepping up role-wise. We have seen his minutes continually increase since the last 3 years. I think 51 last year, 40 the year before, and then about 24, 25 minutes the year before that. So we've continually seen his minutes increase, but 51 minutes still feels pretty considerable, and I don't know how much more higher it's going to get than 51. Maybe it goes 51 to like 53, 54. But in saying that, like if Lindsay Smith is going to be viewed as one of the top 2 props at Penrith, we've seen how Cleary uses him and his middle forwards. Fisher Harris averaged 47 minutes, Leota I think even less than that. So I think Lindsay Smith with 51 minutes might just be where he's at. And again, 54 average, I don't see much changing there in terms of potential value, but definitely someone I'm also looking at. Him, Stefano, and I think Fisher Harris, I've got a keen eye on in terms of what their minutes are going to look like coming into the start of the year. Because I think there could be someone who has a bigger role stepping up this year, but round 1, I'm not quite sure if that's going to be the case. Starting to look at some of the cheaper options where you might see some ownership get a little bit higher as well for the front row. So look, I put in Tom Flegler, but I think he's probably going to be someone most people will avoid unless they get some good news about him coming into round 1, just because he was battling so much with that nerve issue from last year. But I wanted to put his stats there because if he is someone who, look, even if he's named to play round 1, you probably want to wait and see how he looks. But if he ever gets back to that kind of ability that he had showed at the beginning of last year, he was a 59 averaging player and you're getting him at a pretty good price. So just was, again, someone to keep in your kind of black book for maybe later in the year, but probably not going to be a round 1 starter, I think, in your teams. So another couple of options I've got here. I've got Liam Henry at 448k. Look, I'm going to be a bit biased for Liam Henry because he was probably one of the best picks I made last year. I started with him in round 1 compared to, Puasa Farmasili, who a lot of other people had. And Liam Henry just turned out to be an absolute gem. He made so much money. Anytime I needed to play him, he would just punch out these 50s and 60s and sometimes even push higher than that. He was just a dream to own. Look, he could be someone who minutes do step up. He averaged 39 minutes last year, 46 points. He has a really, really good work rate, 1.14 base power PPM. That's rivaling the likes of a Joe Tarpany and getting close to someone like a Terrell May. So he's someone who's got a big motor on him, good work rate. If, again, you see some good minutes output from him in the trials, he could be one of those guys who maybe you put in at that mid 400k that could be offering some value. So look, keep in your black book, but for now, I think I just wanted to mention him because I loved him from what he did for my team last year. There's a lot of other guys in the 400s who I've excluded from the list here. That's because I didn't want to just keep saying for every single player, see what happens in the trial, see what happens with minutes. But you're looking at guys like Jai Arrow, you're looking at Taniela Paseka from Manly. There's a handful of others that I've probably missed, like a Jamin Jolliffe as well at the Titans. I think the information that we know currently, I'm much more confident in those guys in the kind of mid to high 500s or your gun players. and then maybe going and filling your front row with other kind of 300k price guys. There's not many I see at the moment looking like they're going to offer value in that 400k range. Now, Corey Horsburgh at 355k is definitely someone who I think a lot of people are going to be considering. He's currently 41% owned in the game as well. So I've got some more detailed stats on Corey Horsburgh, just in case people were wondering why is he so highly owned. Now, he had a very, very down 2024, only played 5 games for the Raiders, kind of fell out of favor with Ricky Stewart, but from what I've kind of read and watched in the preseason, he seems to be firming and ready to go for 2025. He looks pretty fit as well in some of the videos that I've seen. Now, you want to throw out all your training the house down quotes and stuff like that, but it looks like he's been doing that. And he just represents someone who can offer really good value. So what I've got in this table here is what his price was at the start of each of the last 3 seasons. So last year was 633k, year before 505, year before that 415. So we're looking at someone who in the last 3 seasons was continually increasing in price because his output justified it. 48 average, then 62. But then what you saw last year was only playing the 5 games. He only averaged 45 points at 44 minutes. But coming at 355k, you can really see that value. And even if he gets a bench spot for the Raiders, if he gets into that 45 minutes range, then he could at least be already offering 5 to 10 points of value. And if he gets a starting lock job, which is what he had for a lot of 2023, we're looking at a guy who can push that 60 average, and that's what the form was that got him into the Queensland State of Origin team as well. And I like the narratives of picking up someone who's had a really bad kind of year beforehand and they're really looking to turn things around. You can kind of build that narrative as well in your head of this is someone who's going to be training hard, they're going to be focused on the job, and that's what we like for SuperCoach, someone offering value who's kind of a fallen gun. These are the kind of things that I like to look for when picking for value picks in my round 1 team. So I think Corey Horsburgh can really offer that as a potential option in front row. He's also dual. You can get him in second row. So that's another thing that is also beneficial in his favor. Next up, I've got Spencer Leniu at 393k, 8% owned, averaged 40 points last year in about 41 minutes. Now, a lot of the talk for Spencer Leniu last year was just going to be that he was going to be the guy whose minutes kept increasing at the Roosters. I just think though that his role is this 41 minute playing front row. I don't think he's that kind of player who can play those huge minutes. I think he's best suited when he's got these kind of short spurts and just goes like a bull terrier and just goes for it. So I think with Spencer Leniu, I don't see much changing in terms of minutes. They have lost Wira Hargraves and Terrell May. So look, maybe the minutes do go up, but I need to kind of wait and see this in trials because there's a lot of discussion about this happening last year. Didn't quite happen. Things might be different this year. If we do see some 45, 50-minute games out of him, look, he's not a PPM guy either, like a 0.91 base power PPM. So even if those minutes did go to 50, look, you're probably thinking he's average about 45. It's only 5 points of value, and that's reliant on him getting maybe an extra 9 minutes. And I just feel like that's a lot of ifs that are probably a bit too far out of reach for me to really take a confident start with him in round 1. So look, I'll wait and see on the trials, but at the moment, he's not really someone I've considered for my round 1 squad. Aaron Clark at 391k, a bit more interest coming into him now in the preseason on the back of Tohu Harris's retirement announcement. That does open up that lock spot for the Warriors. Now the expectation is that Dylan Walker is probably going to be taking that spot. But if it so happens to be Aaron Clark, then he's definitely someone who's worth considering just because he's at a pretty good price at 390k. There's only a few games of sample size of Aaron Clark playing at 13 across the last 2 seasons. It's about 5 or 6 games, but I pulled the numbers, and when he was at starting lock, he actually has an average of 67. So numbers initially higher level look quite good for him when he's playing those bigger minutes. But I think the issue is going to be that he's probably, in my view, not going to be getting that number 13 jersey. I think it's going to be Dylan Walker. When he was playing through the middle as a starting 10 last year for the Titans, he had an average of 39.7. So not too different to what his entire season average was. So I think if he is just playing off the bench, kind of playing around those 39 minutes through the middle, maybe a dummy half, I don't really see that much value in him either. I feel like you need to have him playing at the starting 13 jersey, playing much bigger minutes for me to be thinking about him. Nafel White from the Roosters, averaged 33 minutes last year for an average of 38 points. I'm definitely interested in him. A couple of reasons why. So one, he's dual status. So I think I really like that a lot about these picks. If you can get them in second row forward or front row, and if you've got someone like Tino, just being able to rotate them really does help out in terms of the flexibility of your squad, at least at the beginning of the year. So last year in games where he averaged over 40 minutes, White had a total average of 53 points with 46 points in base in that time as well. Now, I think 40 minutes is not unreasonable for him to get just because of those two notable people leaving in Terrell May and Waerea-Hargreaves. So I think Nafal White is someone who, if he gets those extra minutes, decent PPM of 1.06 for base power. Look, if he gets up to 40 minutes, you can expect a 45, maybe 50 average from him. And you're looking at maybe 5 to 10 points of value. So not like an amazing pick, but one of those guys who, because he's got the dual, he's not too expensive at 367. You can maybe just plug him in and hope that it works out. He did have some games last year starting at 13, although some of those still did have some stranger minutes. Like he had 2 games at 13 where he only played 38 and 28 minutes. 2 of those games he had 67 and 56 minutes, and he scored 73 and 53. So I think what this probably feeds into is that if he gets the bigger minutes, he is someone who, work rate wise, does generally continue to maintain a pretty good points output. So I think trials watch expectation is hopefully if he gets up to 40 minutes, it's probably going to be enough for me to say, look, it's not fantastic, but he's dual, not too expensive. I'll plug him in there and trust that he at least gets he may earn me 100 to 150k. That just might be enough. Gets into the low 500s. Maybe then you can flick him to like a Max King or something like that and kind of strengthen your front row forward at that stage. But yeah, not like totally hot on him, but I think he's a decent option and currently is in my round 1 team. Just rounding this out now, taking a look at some kind of more value options sub 350k. So first one that I want to call out is Emre Gula. He's just moved to the Dragons, so $332,000, averaged 34 points last year for 36 minutes. The only reason I put him in here is that, yes, there may potentially be some more minutes at the Dragons. There's a bit of a typo there. It's not Milo, it's Molo, Francis Molo. Look, Molo averaged 41 minutes last year. I don't know what the situation is at the time of recording, but let's assume that Molo is not there anymore and Gula just takes his place and takes the 41 minutes. At a base power PPM of 0.98, so let's call it 1, he might average 42 points. So you're looking at maybe 6 to 8 points of value, which isn't terrible, but it's also nothing amazing. So I think with him, wait and watch, see what the trials minutes look like. But he could be someone who is he could be someone who's one of those slow burn, makes you 100k, but not like outstanding. Cohen Hess, 327k, missed all of 2024. Looking back at some of his averages in the last few seasons, 42, 48, and 44. So that's coming from 2023, 2022, and 2021. In those particular seasons, his minutes average was 50, 39, and 52. So I think you probably do need to firstly see, is he going to make that team for the Cowboys at the get-go? If he does and he's coming off the bench, you probably need to be seeing him average about, I'd say 35 to 45 minutes to probably make it justified, because he doesn't have the best base power PPM, at least from the 2023 numbers, of 0.81. He's currently 7% owned. I think a lot of that is probably due to, one, his name. He's a more known name, and 327k, they're thinking, oh great, he's nice and cheap. Currently not in my team. I'd like to see what the minutes look like though in the trials. The last two I wanted to touch on, Royce Hunt at 249k, 31% owned, so he is one of the more higher owned front rowers. Moving across to the West Tigers, look, the last few seasons at the Sharks, he's been pretty consistent in terms of the role that he's had there, and also then what his output's been. So last 3 seasons, he's averaged 25, 33, and 40. Average minutes though, 24, 25, and 29. So his PPM is actually kind of reduced in the last few seasons. I think what you're probably hoping for is, now that moving at the Tigers, if he's a starter front rower, even if he only averages 30 minutes, it's a 5-6 minute increase. He historically did have a good base power PPM. You know, you're looking at someone who's averaging 25, it might step up to kind of 35. I've kind of penned him here for a 30 to 40 average. If I had to guess, I think he averages around 35. That's 10 points of value. Look, he might be a slow burn, make you 100k. But I think when there's a lack of other good cheapies, he might just be someone to stick with at the beginning of the season and hope that he gets those extra minutes. The last one is Amone from the Bulldogs. Not much word on him in terms of, apart from does he just get a bench spot for the Bulldogs. Look, ideally, I wouldn't have to pick him because it feels a bit like Franklin Pele and then Puaso Famasili, that kind of number 17 front rower at the Dogs who just doesn't really offer much in terms of Supercoach, and you're just stuck with him. So ideally, I probably wouldn't have him. Ideally, I'd have like a White and a Royce Hunt as a bit more solid depth in front row, but appreciate that's obviously spending a little bit more money there. But he's 26% owned. Again, massive trials watch and a massive round one TLT. Probably not much more to add there on that one. All right, guys, that is my front row forward analysis for the preseason. I hope you all enjoyed that video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. It goes a long way to getting the content out there to the rest of the YouTube peoples. Don't know how the algorithm works, but I'm pretty sure liking it and subscribing does help me out. So hopefully if you can do those things if you enjoy the video. Check out my socials in the description below, but I'll see you all in the next one.